Hey, welcome into the channel. I'm Andy, and today we're going to be talking about synthesizers and synthesis and learning synthesis. And I'm sorry for this crappy camera view. The good camera's pointed over here, and I'm not made of money. I don't have 17 awesome cameras. I put my money into this stuff, right? So I've been learning synthesis because I acquired a vintage Minimoog, right? I keep looking up at the camera. That's not the camera we're using, this one. And we'll only be here for a minute, then we're gonna be all over here, so don't sweat it. But I was lucky enough to have this vintage Minimoog come into my life this year, and so I've been learning about synthesis, and it's the best platform ever to learn about synthesis on. Right now you're not hearing it. It's over here. This is the Arturia Mini V3 playing our nice little sequence that we're gonna play with. But it was an interesting synthesizer, the Minimoog, to get first, right? Because maybe you're like me, I've always wanted to learn synthesis. Like what is the damn big deal? Why is so many people, why are they crazy about synthesis? Like, what is it? You know, I mean, that said, I'm I've loved synthesis since I was literally a child. My uncle was way into stuff like that, and I spent a lot of time with him when I was young. And I mean real stuff like Jean-Michel Jarre and that world of synthesis in the 70s, he was tuned in. So Oxygen, Equinox, these records have been bouncing on my head my entire life. I love them. And so I've always wanted to know what is it? But I've never had synthesizers. You know, I keep again looking at that camera. My synthesizers have all been software. You know, this has been my go-to forever. And you're like, but Andy, that's that's a Minimoog. Aren't you talking about your Minimoog in the right here? True. And that's what makes this kind of funny that would be the first one that I get, because it was oh, sweet. Now, if I'm being honest, I would tell you, I've tried more than one time to sit down with this Arturia very faithful recreation of this synthesizer behind me, and attempted to be I'll just put it in the init thing and just go from scratch and see what I can make. And I always end up within 5 minutes just I'm gonna go to presets. And so I never learned it. Bring this into my life physically, sorry about that light behind me, physically, and it's a whole other thing. And so what I've learned, we're going to talk a little bit about today. I'm just going to show a couple of things, no big deal. Just talk about synthesizers, why, because now I'm totally sold on synthesizers, and I have more synthesizers coming into the studio next month. More vintage synthesizers. We'll have an ARP 2600, an ARP Odyssey, and a Yamaha DX7, all coming in next month. And we're going to keep up with all the synthesis and the learning synthesis, because those synthesizers do things slightly different than this synthesizer. We'll just say synth, right? I've been going down synth rabbit holes and learning stuff and whatnot. And of course, I've had a year now that I've just been playing with this thing. And so if you put an instrument into my hands, what's gonna happen is I'm gonna play it in the easiest, fastest or best way possible. I'm just gonna get to it. I'm gonna pick up the instrument and start going. And this has turned out to be such a cool solo instrument, And it's not set it up right now for that. We'll twist some knobs and we'll get into that in a minute. And I'll show you how I like to solo on it and stuff. But as I sat down to do this video, so let's hop over to Ableton and look on screen here. As I sat down to do this video, I was thinking it might be cool to kind of call up the same kind of patch on the software and the hardware, listen to them both, and then be here's the difference between the hardware and the software. It should be said that there is a difference between this vintage hardware and the reissue hardware. that's come out in recent years, you know, versus VST. Nothing, and I agree. I too, just like you, I heard all the people say, you know, over the years, you just can't beat the real thing. The old Minimoog, you know, is such a ridiculous whatever, and it's like, why? Okay, sure. I mean, so it sounds cool. Doesn't this sound cool too? And yeah, they do. They both sound cool, but as you're about to see, not as cool, right? It's not as cool. Like, it's cool. There's something to this, and I'm not usually a mojo guy. There's some mojo to this instrument. I am a little bit now because of this instrument and because of this vintage Les Paul over here, 74 Les Paul. These instruments, they do have a mojo, man. They got a vibe. You pick them up and you're in tune to that vibe a little bit and feeling the music, and it's like, it does a thing. It's fun. So let's dial in the exact same patch, right, on each one of these. Stop that sequence. On the software and on the hardware. So all I did was I opened the Mini V up, and it was set to this 3 oscillator default patch. So basically we've got 3 oscillators, and I'll give you, you know, you're like, wait, dude, I don't know what synthesizers are or what synthesis is or any of that stuff. Let me break it down for you real fast. It's super easy and not that complicated. It's not nearly as complicated as you think, right? So first thing, get out of your head any kind of a thing where you press a button and it's like harpsichord, piano, trumpet. That's not this. This is a synthesizer. Like, that's a keyboard that makes all the sounds of the world. A synthesizer is a thing that takes electricity and it messes with the electricity and makes a sound. And then we take that sound and we give it a pitch, like a frequency, and then we basically filter it. And that's all. And then we might combine, and that's an oscillator, a thing that makes a sound, and we run it through a filter. And what's a filter? It's like an EQ. And in this case, our filters only take things away. It's called subtractive synthesis. So we have an oscillator, and we run it through a filter. Well, that's all fine. If we have 2 oscillators, whoa, that's when things get cool, right? 3 oscillators, even cooler. And so that's what we have with this thing here. You know, back when Bob Moog invented this synthesizer way back in the 60s, 50s, 70s, whatever, 50s, I probably. When this was invented, you know, they started with 1 oscillator, then they start stacking them, and it's like, yeah, this is really cool. So we'll see why it's cool, right? So this is a very faithful recreation that we have here, the Arturia thing, right? On the left, you can see controllers, it says there. You don't have to worry about that. And this is laid out exactly like my real one right here. But we have controllers there. We have an oscillator bank. So that's 1 on top, 2 in the middle, 3 on the bottom. The only reason those 3 things look different at all is, and they're different in terms of this being a knob and this being a switch. My hardware doesn't have this at all. This is to sync the oscillators. In the analog real world, you can't do that there. That's special computer stuff. But the difference is this knob really is accomplished by the tuning on the first oscillator, which kind of runs for overall too. So they are really the same. Even though they don't look quite this, they're just 3 oscillators. So from there, they go into this mixer where we can simply control the levels for 1 oscillator, 2 oscillator, 3. We can also add noise or an external input through the mixer too, but those are other topics. Then it's the filter I was talking about. So you're going to cut things out with this filter and then play with it or emphasize it, but basically that's the filter. And again, you can mess with the filter. It's how it starts, how it holds on, how it ends, stuff like that. And then down here is our actual attack and decay and sustain for just the whole entire sound, right? So that's all there is to it. Oscillators, mixers, filter. So like, cool. Okay, now let's see what 3 oscillator patch this thing sounds like on the software. That's nice, right? We do like this. Now, let's see, what does this sound like? So I've dialed in the exact same patch. I think I did one thing different. Now, let's make sure, because I was going to say, I hear something. We hear this. This is my pedal board for my synth channels. So we have the software and then the actual hardware. Gotta get that right in tune, just right. Software, hardware. So if you are on a good set of studio monitors or headphones, I mean, these are Behringer 770s. I can hear that as long as the day is alive right there. The difference in these sounds. Everything else about the processing and what you're hearing is exactly identical. So yeah, these are, I thought I had messed with some things. I changed the bottom wave is what I did. The waveform on the bottom one, I have it. They have it here. Put it there. But yeah, it could go either way. And it's funny, the reason I changed that was when I first dialed that up a minute ago, Oscillator 3 was totally janking out, right? That's a thing that happens on a vintage keyboard. Like, this key janks out. Like, this is a bad key. This one's okay. Right? So, vintage keyboards are totally fun. Now, never fear. It's totally easy to repair. I just haven't had it done yet. But as we listen to those sounds, with the Moog, with the real one, it's just more there, isn't it? Totally sick. Now, I don't know how it would be accomplished on the actual on the software, but what I like to do, one of the most fun things to do, right? So there, that right there is a basic tone for, like, probably pulling this thing out of view. A basic tone for, like, you know, good synth stuff. That's it right there. This is all three oscillators on. And so one thing that I normally do when I'm playing, I rarely use three oscillators, right? And you're like, what are we going with all this synth stuff? Three oscillators to me, let's see, there's a little something back here. It's two is plenty. Like, you kind of, and I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. You know, two oscillators is a lot. Three is getting pretty busy. What I would prefer to do with that third oscillator, so this is where things get fun and you start to understand synthesis like a little wee bit. So an oscillator is generating a waveform, and you can see on these knobs, it shows you a picture like of what the waveform is here. So we have sine wave over here, and then we start working our way all the way up through the square waves, sawtooths, and that kind of stuff. And it's a picture kind of, you know. So obviously on one end you have the sine wave, which is this really smooth whew, like that, and then all the way on the other hand this notched thing, right? So that's what the oscillator's doing. So the first two oscillators, we'll be using those to, like, make a pitch happen, make a sound. And what does that sound like? You know, well, we can go over here and we can turn off the mixer section, oscillator 2, turn off oscillator 3, and only hear the first oscillator. Right? You're like, yeah, that sounds cool and all. It's not very exciting. If we turn on the second oscillator, ooh, that's more fun, right? We we can mix the two together. So that's a fat sound, and I go, cool. Now what we can then do is take the third oscillator to like do something to the first two as they play. And what we're gonna do, that's something that we're gonna do, is we're gonna mess with the filter. You're like, why? What are you talking about? What's that mean? The filter, right, is this section we talked about up here, right? And so the big thing that makes this keyboard, the Minimoog, like super famous and everybody love it, it's a big fat tone, but there is this filter on here, that's where it's at. So same knob as on the software, it's up here, right? If I hit this, if I roll it all the way back to 0, right, that's what we sound. As we open it up, that's rolling the filter, right? And that right there, that's what everybody finds so incredibly special about this synthesizer is the filter. I mean, a lot of things, but the smoothness of this filter, you know, the awesomeness of that filter. So I can change oscillator 2's waveform, right? It was here, like sawtoothy. Roll that back more into sine land. You get more bass. Oops, wrong. You get more bass. Right? Turn on oscillator 1 again. And you're like, yeah, now we've got some serious bottom. Oscillator 1 added to oscillator 2. Like, woo, there's the sound. So, but we want it to be more interesting, and we're only using 2 oscillators so far, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the third oscillator. It's also going to use its waveform, and we'll pick a waveform. We're going to pick sine, right? So this waveform is like this, like totally like smooth and whatever. We'll set it all the way low on the length of, like, it's the pitch of the oscillator basically is what this knob is. And we're talking about this guy right over on the left side where it says range. This is how deep. Lower, high, like 2, 4, 8, that gets higher, 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 and then lower, 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 all the way down to low. The low things down here, these are just, you'll hear, it's just like a click, basically. So when I put that over to there and I turn that on in the mixer there, like you don't even really hear anything. Hear that? Click, click. So different waveforms. And you're like, well, this is stupid. What are you doing to this? Why would you want to do this? It's like, so when we put it to sine like that, and then we then have this thing control the filter up here, which we can do by pulling in the mod wheel. So now that waveform on oscillator 3 is now going to affect that filter, right? So as I turn up my mod wheel, you hear it? Where's the camera? Oh, this camera. Wow, 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 wow. So how fast that does that is controlled by this frequency knob. Slower, faster. So we can then pull our cutoff back some. We get to get interesting sounds. And so that's how that's how you're going to use the third oscillator. Maybe you want it to be, I do a lot of this. Just put it on one of those notchy ones. stuff like that. Like I do that a lot when I'm, you know, just building up textures, adding in sounds, you know, because you can totally get that thing popping on the beat. Dan, 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 dan. It's in songs of mine all over the place. And so that's a big part of how I've been using the Minimoog as I've been doing things. So the lead tone generally, you know, if I'm like, so there'll be bass stuff like that. Of course, and like I said, this thing is like a solo instrument. Let's start this little sequence up here. And in fact, right there, all I'm doing is manipulating the cutoff filter on this Arturia Minimoog. I guess the microphone is kind of blocking it, but same control that we were just talking about with the Moog. Same exact thing is I can just turn this knob. When I close the filter, we hear it like this. When I open it, here it comes. That's our filter. Now, you just play a note, you're like, I mean, that's cool and fine, but like we can do better. So now let's use this oscillator, the third oscillator. Instead of to do the filter, we can flip this switch, right? And we can say, instead, let's let that thing modulate the oscillators above it, like modulate their pitch. You go, okay. So now when I pull that modulation wheel in, and it's gonna do that dippy dipness based on this knob. Slower, faster. So I like to like run it just anywhere in about 12 o'clock, and it's gonna have a bit of a vibrato. So then I can do like this. Gives you a nice vibrato. And then we get to my favorite control in this thing, which is I can route, and you can too. I don't know about the software, I haven't tried any of this, but route your headphone output to the external input, and you can have control of that here and here. So this actually explains, I have a little bit of tape over here, because again, vintage instruments, this light's only supposed to light up when you have something going through this circuit, but a little while back it just kind of got stuck on. So there's a piece of tape kind of blocking it from view a little bit there. But that is our external input, and it makes the most beautiful and amazing distortion you have ever heard. This is the Bob Moog drive right here. Dude, that is so sick. And you can keep going. So I use that all the time. And I'm adding in here the glide, the portamento, to make the notes kind of smoother. really, that's probably plenty to talk about, like, with the thing today. But, you know, the big takeaway is that, yeah, the real synths are, like, super, super cool. I couldn't be more excited that I have more of them about to come to the studio next month, because they sound better. They really do. Not to take anything away from these software versions, which are totally badass awesome too. They're just not as awesome, you know, I guess. It's like, let's real quick bump this up to, we'll just do the same thing that we just did with the other one. I think we put this to here. Bump this down, turn the mixer off. Let's turn the filter mod on. Put on a sine wave. I don't know. I didn't really try and dial in that sound, but again, there's just like, there's no comparison. They're both great, but like this thing is insane. So, and you know, there's a lot of like really, really good. Behringer makes a Moog Model D like this. That's what this is, the Model D. Behringer makes one that is sick good, you know? So there is something too, I'm learning, to this hardware synth world. So I hope that's been somewhat interesting to you. If it's not, sorry. Cheers! Go get you a synth. Get a VST, play around. Who knows, dude? You might have fun. Anyways, rock your day. If you had fun around here, dude, hit the subscribe. Cheers.